One of the things I find curiously interesting is this whole assumption between men and women and what it took for us to be successful. Here's what I mean. It's so interesting that when women achieve success, it's often attributed to us being lucky to have accomplished that. While when men achieve success, it is attributed to their ability that they earned it in some type of way. What I want to do is dismantle and disrupt that notion. The truth is, we as women, when we are successful, we earn our seat at the table. This is why I always want to encourage women to take up space. You're not there by luck. That notion just really disrupts and often discredits everything we bring to the table. We are not lucky to be there. They are lucky to have us. Now let's get into it. For the longest time, I secretly wanted more. I often found myself shrinking to fit in, settling for what was comfortable, and even selling myself short. Once I finally accepted that we deserve success and we are blessed with the power to achieve it, I stopped playing small. I'm serious about building a life I love, and you should be too. I'm Denise Taylor of DeniseTaylor.live, and welcome to Embrace Your Power. I help women prioritize themselves, their success, and their happiness. Now let's meet this week's achiever, whose story will inspire you to embrace your power and go. Well, hello there. It's Denise Taylor here. And I am always excited to have you join me each and every week right here on Embrace Your Power. Now, this is the place where you can count on me to always encourage you to build a life that you love. More than that, I believe that God has given us the power to do it. You see, in his word, he said he didn't give us fear, he gave us power. And when we embrace our power, we truly can be, do, have, and achieve anything that we want. Now, I will tell you, I believe you will be divinely inspired to go after the things that God wants to do in your life. And when you do that, you are going to experience satisfaction and fulfillment that is going to light you up from the inside out. And that is exactly what I want for you. I want you to experience being lit up from the inside out. Now, in season 2 of the podcast, I have doubled down on your career success. And here's the reason why. A big part of building a life that we love involves our career. The truth is, we spend a great deal of time and we invest a great deal of ourselves in our workplace experience. So it only makes sense that we have right expectation to experience success in our career. And I want to help you achieve that. I want to help you develop the skills, the savvy, and the momentum to get the career success that you want and deserve. And I know for some of us, that means that we have to go back to what worked for us before. We have to begin to see things differently and energize our experience with some insight and wisdom. That's the reason why I'm having these incredible conversations with these successful women so that we can glean from their experiences. Now, if you've been with me the last couple of weeks, then you know I encouraged you to get a journal. I want you to take notes. The reason why that's important is because as you're continuing on your success journey, I want you to have resources to help you make good choices and decisions to keep moving forward. Now, I don't know if you're watching me on YouTube or maybe you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, but what I do know is this is not a chance meeting. You are here because God has something he wants to do in your life, and I want to encourage you in your journey to just do it. Now, around these parts, we talk a lot about the success superpower. So if you're new, it's important that you get on the same page with us. That's the reason I'm going to take a couple minutes to unpack them, because they're so foundational to your success journey. There are 5 success superpowers, and each of them are critical to how you are going to pursue your success. Success superpower number 1 is see yourself successful. Now, this one is so critically important. We have to begin to envision ourselves being, doing, having, and achieving the success that we desire. I love to say that you have to daydream without limitations on what it is that you want to achieve. Seeing yourself accomplishing it really lights you up to go after it with diligence and resolve. Success superpower number 2 is shake off fear. Now, that one is so important because as we dream big, sometimes fear begins to set in. But what I want you to know is fear as an emotion is not a bad thing. It just lets you know that you need to tap into the strength and help that you have available for you so that you can persevere. The fact is, I don't want you to pray your fear away. You need to be able to give appropriate pause and concern when things are going on around you. But where it goes wrong is when fear stops us. We have to be able to go back and tap into the power that God has given us and know that we can do it. We can make great things happen in our lives. Success superpower number 3 is do the work. And here's the fact. You got a role to play. You have work to do. You've got to put your hand to the plow. In fact, you must give God something to bless. He said he would bless the work of our hands, which means you must get busy. Success superpower number 4 is take care of you. And I love this one because we often relegate our self-care to tips and toes. We're real good about a trip to the nail salon. But what I want you to know is that you are created beautifully. And there's so many dynamic pieces and facets to you. So your self-care plan needs to be comprehensive to cover all areas that are important to your well-being. Strength for the journey is going to tie back to how well you take care of you. And then finally, the last success superpower is hold fast to your faith. That one is so critically important because on our success journey, we will run into days of contradiction, days when we expected it to go right and it went left, days when we expected it to go up and it went down, and days when it just did not work out as we hoped. It's in those days that your faith is so critical to persevere and see the end that you desire. Now, what I love about the success superpowers is they're reusable, which means you can use them over and over again. They're also transferable, which means that whatever area of your life you're desiring success in, you can apply the superpowers to them. And the last is they are reliable. They will work for you when you put them to work. Now, I have an incredible guest joining me today straight from the C-suite. And I love talking to C-suite leaders because you get tips from the top. You're talking with someone who has persevered and traversed to high levels in the organization, and hearing from them lets you know about what's important for you to invest yourself in and how they see things from that position. And so it is my pleasure to welcome Terrilynn to the podcast today. And this is an incredible conversation that you're going to glean so many nuggets from. So let me tell you a little bit about her, and then we'll get into it. Terrilynn Million Short is a Divisional Chief Executive. She is the chairperson for a portfolio of companies. In this role, she focuses on both organic and acquisition growth. Prior to joining her current company, she was a vice president and general manager. She led the go-to market and new product strategy, as well as operational improvements to deepen customer relationships and accelerate growth. And prior to that, she held a global leader position, overseeing the P&L responsibilities as well as operations and employees in North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific. She helped transform the approach to key account management and product innovation. She has an MBA from Stanford Graduate School of Business and a Bachelor of Science from Miami University. Terrilynn lives in the Chicago area with her husband and 2 sons. Now, there's so many rich nuggets, and I want you to consider this conversation a mentor conversation for you, someone who is going into their experience and laying out tips from the top. I'll see you on the other side. So I'm so excited to have Terrilynn join me today, and I anticipate that this is going to be such an amazing conversation. And so I don't want to belabor our time. I want to jump in. I'm anxious for her wisdom and advice. So let's just get started. Terrilynn, do me a favor and introduce yourself and briefly walk us through your career.
Oh, very good. Well, thank you for having me. And I'm too am looking forward to our conversation. So I am Terrilynn Million Short, and I'm currently a Divisional Chief Executive at Halma. And that job entails 2 things, one being the chairperson of a portfolio of our companies. And then the other side of my job is identifying other companies to bring into the portfolio via acquisition. So it's a terrific job, terrific company. And the one thing I do want to just mention before I go too much further is that I'm here today just representing Terrilynn. So even though I work for Halma, and I am a divisional chief executive at Halma, anything that I share today are my own views and not necessarily those of my company, even though if they happen to agree or align with my company's views there, it's strictly mine. Okay. So I'm at Halma, and prior to Halma, I worked for SPX as a vice president and general manager for our supplemental heating business. And prior to that, I was at Illinois Toolworks as a business unit leader for our business unit that made specialty chemicals and metals for electronic assembly. Mm-hmm. And then prior to that, I was in the retail space at Sears, leading the Kenmore laundry and dishwasher business. And then prior to that, I have experience at the Boston Consulting Group as a consultant in our consumer retail and our operations practice, and then also in investment banking and asset management. So a very diverse career. But I think it's actually been very beneficial to me in what I do today. And it's been a nice building block. I wouldn't have planned it this way, but I'm glad it worked out the way it did.
Yeah, you had a chance to spend some really great time across a lot of industries. And so understanding how that translates into this experience that you are leading right now is going to be great to unpack. And so you just kind of mentioned it wasn't necessarily what you scripted, but it's turned out to work out very well for you. So my very first question is, has your career blossomed in terms of where you are now unexpectedly, or did you always see yourself in the seat that you sit in at the helm of leading a great organization like you do?
I wish I had that great a vision for myself. Way back in high school, I actually thought I was going to be an attorney because LA Law and Corbin Burnson, he was my heartthrob at that time. So definitely not doing anything attorney related. And I went to undergrad at the great Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, with a degree in systems analysis, which is essentially computer science. And I actually thought I was going to be doing that. So I would not have envisioned this for myself. And I hope that, my 18-year-old self is quite pleased with where my quite older self has ended up. But it's been a great journey, and I think that, for women out there and others thinking about their career, I think it's just that recognizing that it is a journey. Mm-hmm. And you often come into it with a script, but you have to be open to the possibilities, right? And be agile to recognize where things are moving and be willing to shift. Mm-hmm. And I think recognize that each step, whether it's a sideways step or an up or back or lateral or whichever direction you're going, is an opportunity to learn and to keep building skills that you can take with you anywhere in your career. Mm-hmm. That's probably been the most fun in my career, is even though I have worked across a lot of different categories, geographies, business models, etc., is seeing the connective tissue across all of those things. You would think there is no relationship between women's intimate apparel and supplemental heating, but there are things that I did supporting a brand in women's intimate apparel that applied to some of the work that we did in supplemental heating.
That's awesome. You know, it's really interesting listening to your journey. And the only thing that keeps coming up for me is you had to lead with your yes and figure out how to navigate the rest of it. How did you get so courageous that you were willing to take those steps and say yes to those opportunities as they came up?
Yeah, my motto in life, and it has been this way for a long time, and I've tried to impart this to my boys. I've got two boys, a 16 and 18-year-old, is if I say I can, I will. Mm-hmm. And I often say to myself, whether I'm working out or I'm at work or really in anything that seems insurmountable, is I can and I will. Mm-hmm. And I just bring that mindset to anything. And I think the other thing that has fueled me is I'm just a naturally curious person. Mm-hmm. Right. And so where I see an opportunity or question marks, that's an opportunity for me to lean in. Mm-hmm. And to your point, say, yes, let me look over here and learn about that and see how mm-hmm. It can be impactful for both me, but others in the organization. And I think that natural curiosity has helped me overcome any fears and just having that, I don't know if I'd say confidence, but just comfort mm-hmm. in knowing that if I really put my mind to it, I can figure this out. Mm-hmm. And I can find some other people along the way that will want to work together and help figure it out too.
Mm-hmm. That's very, very powerful, especially when you look at the leadership roles that you have had and now the role that you have. And I would imagine that you have figured out how to lead teams well. And right now you sit in a seat that's a pretty big role. And so I'm kind of curious, like, what did you learn from yourself stepping into this role when it comes to the work and leading the teams the way that you do?
One of the things, and probably at each juncture in my career, because I've often had the pleasure and the fun, and honestly, that has made my job a lot more fun and interesting along the way of doing things that make me uncomfortable. Meaning, it isn't something I've been doing my entire career, right? Going into categories that are new for me. And a big part of that is really about being willing to fail. Mm-hmm. And I think, and actually seeing failure not as bad. I often ask people, that I've worked with before, of where have you failed? Tell me about a failure you've had, because I believe that failure is a good thing. Mm-hmm. Failure is how we learn. Failure is how we innovate. Failure is how we drive change. There's nothing that you can do without failing. Mm-hmm. Right. And I think that for me in this role, it's continuing to be comfortable with that. Right. And learning that resilience from saying, I can do something for which I'm not familiar, for which I'm still learning. Right. And do it in a way that can bring value with others, and do it in a way that through the process of failure, first attempt in learning is how I think about the word fail, first attempt in learning. Right. Mm-hmm. In a way that helps me to grow and helps others to grow, right? While still leveraging some innate skills that I bring, both just because of who I am as well as experiences that I have, and recognizing that they all build on each other.
I would imagine those that you work with have to feel as though they have your trust to be free in that. Right? Because not all leaders and not all environments welcome that openness around take the shot and we'll deal with the after effects and learn from it. Right? Definitely in some of the research spaces that obviously is part of the journey. But when you're working with the leaders on your team, how are you establishing trust so that they feel free in that?
Yeah. Well, part of it is getting to learn them and giving people hopefully a chance to learn me.
Mhm.
I think the other piece for me, and I just think about myself and my career, and either having been in those roles or other similar roles, it's made it difficult when I would say when I felt judged, but judged meaning it's either black or white. It's either on or off, yes or no. It's either right or wrong versus being willing to see the grays in that, and that, okay, there are learnings that are happening. There are things that they were all bringing to this opportunity, whether it's something that's working well or working that's not working well. And so part of what I also try to do, hopefully, is not bring judgment. It's bringing that been there, done that empathy, meaning I've been in that role, I've been in your shoes,
Mhm.
and I understand the journey that you're on and the struggles that you may be encountering,
Mhm.
and recognizing as well and giving them that appreciation that first attempt in learning, you cannot lose, you can only learn, right? You cannot lose, you can only learn. And I hope that people recognize that,
Mhm.
right? That I'm not here to judge them one way or another, but recognizing that it's all a continuum of learning and
Mhm.
growing together, and helping people understand that we're here in partnership together, right? Even though I may technically be their manager or boss or have a higher title, if there's such a thing, but we're all here together, um, doing our best through the role that we're in to really help this organization and help this team be its best.
That's really good. As you're talking, the only way that can work is shared interest in the vision. And so, as a leader, one of the things that we have a key responsibility to do is share that vision and make it come alive and secure the buy-in. And so, in order for me to, really feel like I've got a good seat at the table, I have to have my connection to the big picture and the vision of what's happening. And so, can you just share a couple of ways of how you bring your team along and inspire them and really invite them into the vision of what it is you're trying to do and accomplish?
Mm. Well, I think the big thing is that it's not my vision, it's our vision,
Mhm.
right? So it's about not me, but we. And I think
Mhm.
that's so important that people recognize that and feel that for
Mhm.
me, and feel that for themselves. And I think the other piece is, you know, facts don't lie. And I think that, you've got to bring data. It could be hard data, it could be soft data, but data that you're bringing and generating together and using that to assess the situation and understand where the opportunity lies, and what unique skills and abilities that our business is bringing to that can allow us to differentiate, and what that means for the direction that we need to head in based on those facts, both facts of the market, facts of the competition, facts of who we are, facts of where we want to play, how we want to win, and what right we have to win in that space. And it's all about doing it together,
Mhm.
right? It's not, and I think that in general, I've always tried to bring a we, not a me mindset to things. And honestly, it makes it a lot more fun.
Mhm.
It makes it a lot more fun.
Mhm. That's so good. So when I look at leadership, right, and I look at the landscape of corporate America, this is not anything that you have to tell me. I know the statistics, right? I can look at the numbers and be pretty much assured that the landscape that you have been able to navigate through was filled with high powered men.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm also pretty certain a good number of them are white men. And being a Black woman to have excelled to the levels that you've been able to and achieve the things that you've been able to achieve, I would want to understand how you navigated that course and what kind of challenges you face leading men and how you've overcome those.
Yeah, really good question. I think probably the biggest challenge, some of it just, there's such a history, right, to women and women in corporate America. And at times, some of it I have to say is on me, just meaning how am I perceiving a situation? So it's if you hear the concept in intention versus impact, right? Well, someone may have an intention in saying something. Let's say if they talk over or mansplain, as sometimes it may be called, or catch one to a point and they get the credit for it, that an idea that I may have brought, that may not have been their intention, but the way that it impacts me because of the history and because of my own experiences, maybe a different thing than what they're intending. And so part of it has been about getting comfortable with having those conversations and just saying, hey, is that what you meant by that? Right? Hey, is that what you meant by that? Because oftentimes people don't mean it that way. Sometimes they do, and you can usually smell those. You can usually smell those situations. You know it, right? But a lot of times people don't intend it that way, and I think it's just being willing to say, "Hey, is that how you meant it?" You know. And I think the second piece is trying to find that common ground and recognizing that even though we all bring something different, I'm obviously an African American woman, there's a lot that we have in common, right? And at the same time, the thing that I'm not going to do is I'm not going to compromise myself. I mean, I'm going to be who I am. I can't change the fact that I'm a Black woman. I cannot change the fact that I love color and patterns, and at times it will sparkle into the office. That's who I am. Right? I can't change who I am, but I'm going to be comfortable in my own skin, and I'm going to do it in a way that says, I expect you to receive it because I'm not changing it. Right. And I'm not going to apologize for it. And I think that's really been the thing, is just not letting it stop me. Right. For as much as it's easy to second guess things and wonder and it's like, hey, I stay focused on the job that has to be done. Right. And what we need to deliver. And I don't get wrapped up in how I present myself. You know, I have natural hair. You know, I don't let that stop me. At the end of the day, we've got a job to get done. And I am confident enough and comfortable enough in the skills and the experiences that I bring to know that I deserve to be in that room, whether you like it or not. I deserve to be in that room. And I have a lot that I can contribute to you. And hopefully people will recognize that and appreciate it.
You know, I remember once when I tried to dumb down a perspective of me, and I'll tell you, it's the word sparkle that you said that caught my attention. And I was in an industry, it was the building materials industry. And when it was my first time going out to the field, you know, I had my conversation with the HR director, and she didn't mean any harm. She was just trying to give me some wisdom, right? Some insight and some feedback. And she said, well, when you go out to the field, you know, they don't really dress, so you can kind of dress down. And I will tell you, I was so tremendously uncomfortable that entire time because I felt like I had on a look that wasn't me. And for as much as I'm listening to you talk, I think one of the things that happens when you don't show up authentically to who you are, be it patterns, colors, sparkle, hair, whatever it may be, that's your preference, it's almost like you're putting on a suit that doesn't fit, and you can't bring your best self to the table and all your great ideas and all your witty insight and all your innovation, because there is a blocker. There's something standing in the way. And I will never forget how I felt that one trip that I just didn't have my bling, or I just didn't have, you know, a look that I felt most comfortable in. And I vowed I would never do that again. I vowed that if I go on these trips, they are going to get the look that I feel comfortable wearing, because it made me show up as my best self. And I don't think that we understand the cloaks that we're trying to put on people when we don't allow them to show up with what they enjoy and what they feel.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. And I think your point around that, just that authenticity, right? And sometimes we are masking, right? And I'm sure there are things that I adjust without even realizing I'm adjusting. But in general, I try to bring who I am
Mm-hmm.
And if that's not comfortable for you, so be it. But at the end of the day, I'm going to focus on what needs to get accomplished.
Mm-hmm.
What do we have to deliver together, and try not to let that stand in the way of progress.
Mm-hmm.
I do remember an experience at a prior company I was at. A young engineer, a female engineer, came up to me and said, "I'm so glad. I think I had something on, in fact, that was sparkly." And she said, "I'm so glad you wear that because that makes me feel more comfortable,
Mm-hmm.
right? Dressing in a way that represents who I am." And that meant a lot to me because it wasn't until that moment that I realized how me showing up as me,
Mm-hmm.
not as a white man,
Mm-hmm.
how that could impact others around me, and and hopefully even for white men, make them feel more comfortable being more themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and presenting themselves more authentically to who they are.
Mm-hmm. It does. It absolutely does. Because I can remember just seeing someone up on the stage that looks like me, just seeing someone speaking that looks like me. It just opens up the gateway in your mind to what's possible for you, and that there's a place for you. And so that representation completely makes a difference. And so I know for myself, when I'm in environments where women are few or women of color are few, I'm usually pretty intentional to go make a connection and lead with that.
Mm-hmm.
So that the ones who are commonly not recognized or not acknowledged feel like they were on that day, in that time, and in that space. And it absolutely makes a difference. And I think as organizations begin to understand that more, they will really understand that they're releasing the power of the human capital resource that they invest so heavily and richly in, when they begin to have leadership look like the people who are at the levels in the organization really doing the work. I know I talked about that company and what it was to travel out to the field, but when the guys who worked in the yards would see me and see someone who looked like them, who was coming in from corporate, it always made a difference. They were always full of smiles. They were always ready to acknowledge and have a hearty, hi, how are you doing conversation. Let me know if there's anything I can do. And I don't think that there's enough attention or respect to that point and how it makes a difference. And I'm not saying tokenize anybody. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying be very deliberate about making sure that you're bringing talent into organizations that really represent the whole of what your organization has. So that's me on my soapbox a little bit.
Otherwise, take advantage of the full pipeline of talent that is available.
Yes.
I think oftentimes companies truncate the talent that they have access to because they're looking at a very narrow sliver.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Excellent. So in our meet and greet, one of the things that I didn't have line of sight to is the international touch that you have in your role, and how you have a lot of responsibilities outside of the US. And so I think that that is so commendable, but I do also know that you're running into some cultural dynamics, especially when you start touching into leadership values and principles and best practices that may be happening in other parts of the world. And so I just wanted to ask a question about what that's like for you, and if maybe you can share some wisdom for any woman leader that may be working with new cultures as the borders continue to collapse and we get into more global business.
Yeah, I think it's always good to just two things. One, well, maybe three things. One, do your research. I think there are a lot of sites you can go to on the web. Oftentimes, HR teams and other groups within the organization will have information about different cultures, right, that you can read up on, and certainly talking to other fellow leaders who have traveled to those areas. Sometimes even just putting it out on your your social pages, someone will respond. But do your research so you understand. I think too, listen. I think sometimes it's good to just to listen and to receive, because I think generally speaking, whether you're going to a different culture in another country or it's just a different culture within your corporation, you're going from marketing into operations or from one business unit into another business unit, oftentimes you'll find other cultures, but I think being willing to just listen. Mm-hmm. Right, and not bring assumptions, right? Because mm-hmm. oftentimes you might have a culture that's viewed as being more patriarchal, more mm-hmm. hierarchical. But what I find in those places is that yes, while that does exist, at the same time, there's more often than not an openness mm-hmm. for people, because to your point, the borders are collapsing, not just here for us in the U.S., but globally. Mm-hmm. And so I think that people are sort of bringing down some of those walls that culture has inhibited, Mm-hmm. I think listening and bringing an open mind. Mm-hmm. And then I think the third thing I would say is just being your authentic self. Mm-hmm. We talked about that a little bit just in terms of how we present ourselves and how we show up. But I think that it is also true as you go across different cultures. The more that you are who you are versus trying to fit in and seemingly play to their culture, if you will, people can sniff that out. Mm-hmm. I think it's better to be yourself, but in the process, accept them as their self, mm-hmm. right? Accept them as their self. Mm-hmm. And that's been my general approach. I mean, I certainly have some fun stories. I won't call them horror stories, but some fun stories where I was in country in Southeast Asia, and a gentleman refused to believe that I was the boss, and in fact he told me, no, you can't be the boss. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute, hold on. Or I had a gentleman in another Latin country who actually told me he quit because I was a woman. He didn't want to work for a woman, as an example. So those things exist, but I will say they're few and far between. Mm-hmm. More often than not, I find people that are very open and receptive mm-hmm. to me mm-hmm. and me to them. Right. And as we talked about previous, intention versus impact, people can see when you're bringing good intentions, even when you might make a cultural misstep. I remember there was a big to-do when Michelle Obama, I think she touched the Queen, and it was like, oh, clutch my pearls. She touched the Queen, but I'm sure the Queen felt her positive intention. Mm-hmm. She wasn't trying to do a slight. So intention versus impact. If you're bringing good intentions, mm-hmm. people can usually feel that,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think what I recognize is they're just as excited to see and meet you, Yeah, right. And I also have found in leading, especially in the technology space, that's where both of us began, right? So it's especially leading in the technology space where you do have a lot of engagement with a lot of different cultures, is just allow your curiosity to be healthy and be open to hearing. I would have days where I'm like, bring in your dishes. I want to taste them. Tell me about this. I would just ask a lot of questions. And people love talking about where they come from, and they love talking about the things that they value and what's important to them. And it allowed you to forge relationships in a way that made working okay and made it a non-issue because you were curious. And I think sometimes we can be so dismissive and try to make it a non-issue by not talking about the differences instead of really leaning into them.
Yeah, I think in general, ask more questions and speaking and directing and having more answers. It's good to have answers at some point, but generally speaking, leading with questions mm-hmm. and bringing an open mind to the answer that comes. Yeah, that's such a good insight you shared.
Mm-hmm. So the next question I have, and I think it's real interesting that you talked about some of the experiences you had with people who made their decisions about not wanting to work for a woman in those particular cases. But how do you tease out bias, and how do you address it when it comes up? Are you inspecting the words that are being said or the actions? And I would imagine that it's making you ask questions of yourself, like, is this happening because I'm a woman? Is it happening because I'm an African American woman? Or am I being sensitive, right? You got all those dynamics. So how are you teasing that out when you run into it?
Mm, yeah, it's having been around for a long time. It's one of those you know it when you see it and when you experience it. And again, the difficult thing with bias, it's not to keep repeating this, but intention and impact, was that conscious or was that subconscious? Did they mean it to have that impact on me or others? And so your earlier point around asking questions and just being comfortable to say, hey, did you mean it that way? Or did you know that when you say it that way, it can have that impact and that reception on me or others? And I think because it's really shoot first, ask questions later. When you're dealing with the crossing of cultures, be they geographic or one function to another function, or a Black woman to a white man, or a Black woman to a white woman, or whatever it may be, a lot of unintended things can happen just because we all bring our own history and perceptions to the table and to that room, And I think that in general, asking questions, right, and being able to kind of share openly, but in a supportive way. I mean, I try not to approach things hostily, bringing an attitude, because that implies a presumption that they meant to do something wrong. Instead, asking, hey, what did you mean by that? And being willing to listen and letting them know how it impacted. And sometimes I'm in rooms where there may be other women, and I know as a senior woman, I've got a role to play in that room. And sometimes you see people take another point or talk over someone, and I try to redirect when I see that happening. Hey, so and so, I heard you say that earlier. They just mentioned it. You want to speak more on it now that it's coming back up? And doing things like that to also help both hopefully highlight for the person who might be over talking someone or taking credit for someone's earlier point, that, hey, not cool. But then also for that other person, giving them space to speak, And I just think we've got to not assume the worst, because when you do, you approach it in that way, But at the same time, you have to address it. You can't ignore it. You cannot look the other way. Right.
Yeah. And I love the strategy of bringing the people into the conversation and dealing with it in the moment. Because I think oftentimes when things that are difficult come up, we have a tendency to want to wait till after the fact to try to address it. And in that later time, it's not as real as when it's happening in the moment. And so developing the savviness, if you will, that you talked about, to be able to recognize those dynamics that are happening and lead the team so that you can still elevate the voice that was overshadowed, or give correcting guidance in a non-threatening way to the voice that was overpowering. I think that is such a key dynamic in being able to lead that group to get to the end together, because usually what happens is the one who felt overpowered would leave the meeting and feel defeated in some way, or disrespected in some way. But I think when you are able to manage the conversation, as you said, it brings us all along and it helps us to get to the end of it together.
Yeah. And it's tough. I mean, because there's so much emotion around bias. Because obviously there's a multi-century, 400-year history here, certainly in the U.S. around, and there's a lot of understandable and rightful emotion associated with it. But we can't move forward if we allow that to overcome us. And in general, I try to assume the best. Right. I want to give you a reasonable doubt. That's not the right word, but just just assume the best in you and assume that you're bringing good intentions. And that has really helped me go into situations where people might be hostile. There might be issues, but recognizing, one, you're a good person, and two, trying to have some empathy for what might make you respond and behave that way, but ultimately knowing that we've got to come together and be on the same page about what do we have to accomplish together as a team, but ultimately you can't not address it. It has to be addressed, but doing it in a way that allows people to move forward together. And I think the other thing for me is having, there's bias, but there's things that tip the line, when someone may use an abusive language, right? Inappropriate language. There's zero tolerance for that. That gets stamped out quickly. And I do not allow that. Right.
Yeah, that's when rank comes in handy. For sure. Because it's almost like the buck stops here, and I'm not going to allow that to continue. And I don't want to create those dynamics of disparity between how we come to the table. But at the same time, I'm the owner of the table to make sure that we're all valued well here.
Yeah, there's over talking, there's doing things, excluding, but then when you start going into, like I said, and things that are inappropriate, that for sure is zero tolerance for that. Yeah.
So I think what I hear you saying in the most polite and effective way is that you know how to rise up and be an ally for people. And so I guess I would love to hear from you is, how do you recognize an ally for yourself? And when you look at your career and you look at your experiences, how important is it to ensure that your own leadership and those that you're accountable to are an ally for you?
Yeah. Yeah, that is so important. Whether you're talking about women, minorities, African Americans, people that are part of the LGBTQIA community, it's so important just to feel seen, right? And to feel important. And I think for me, in identifying an ally, it's a person who's making room around the table or around the conversation, a person who's willing to recognize that just small things. Hey, we're all golfing. Everybody doesn't golf. Let's do something different, but willing to make adjustments to open the aperture, open up the tent and allow others to participate, a person that has been willing to reach out, a person who's been willing to try and relate. I had a leader in another company that I worked for recognize that I'm a sports, I'll call myself a sports interested, not a sports fan. My husband is the ultimate Buckeye fan, but I'm sports interested. But he recognized that I was not deeply involved in the conversations going way deep into sports. And he brought it back and made it in a way that was relatable. And recognized that. And that said a lot to me about him. There are people who have reached out and said, hey, I see what you're doing and I appreciate what you're doing. Let me support you. And that's meant a lot, but ultimately I think it's when you see people who are making the table bigger, right? And allowing for bigger, broader conversations. To me, that's an ally who's willing to do it publicly, not just behind closed doors. I mean, that's important too. You have to do both things, but also doing an open and setting an example and setting a tone for the rest of the team.
I think one of the best things that an ally is in a position to do is to not only raise their voice for you, but lend their credibility to you as well. Sure. And I love the phrase that you're offering here when you talk about make the table bigger. In that whole spectrum of being inclusive, I think that that's what's necessary, right? Because when you describe it as seats at the table, it makes it seem like the opportunities are limited, right? And that creates this whole notion of infighting, because it's almost like musical chairs, right? Like I'm trying to grab a seat. I want a seat at the table. But when you refer to it as make the table bigger. It says that I'll make room for you. I'll make space for you. And I love that phrase that you're sharing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's one of those things that's, as you ask the question, it makes me more conscious of my role as a leader. I try to do that, but I know that for me, at times I'm guilty of getting busy, and busy is not an excuse, but this is a bit of an accountability question, right? And so one of my actions from our discussion is to make sure that I am making time, because I don't want to not be an ally. I do and see myself as an ally for people, but part of it is you have to make time, right?
Mm-hmm.
It happens in the room, but there's also just conversations that happen to keep pulling in people and engaging people,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's important. It's important.
So let me ask you this question, especially from the C-suite perspective. What's one of the biggest misconceptions about a role like yours?
Mm, I think that somehow the work is light, and that you're just going to meetings and you're telling people what to do. I think the other piece is that you make all the decisions. You just call the shots. Do this, do that, do this, do that. And there's definitely work involved, hard work
Mm-hmm.
involved. And it is definitely not do this, do that, do this, do that, and directing. It is really about collaborating. It's really about collaborating.
Mm-hmm. That's good. I love that. And so I'm going to give you three characteristics, and I just want you to tell me which one you feel is most important for success. So the first one is clarity. The second one is confidence. And the last one is courage. So of those three, what's most important to your success and why?
Mm, clarity, confidence, and courage. I think for me, courage has been probably the most important.
Mm-hmm.
Not that the other two aren't, but courage for me has been, as I described at the start, I've had a very diverse career, and I have appreciated that. That's what's made it so much fun.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I really enjoy what I do, even when it's hard, even when it's long and I'm tired. I really enjoy it. But part of my success has been willing to go into the unknown, has been willing to be comfortable being uncomfortable. I will say, I'm uncomfortable being comfortable. Honestly, if I'm somewhere where I'm like, I've got this all figured out, I know exactly how it's going to work, I know exactly what to do, I've been here and done that 1,000 times, that makes me very uncomfortable. Status quo makes me deeply uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but having that courage, to go in to places that are unknown, into things that are highly ambiguous, into things that have not been done before, that is what has helped me in my career
Mm-hmm.
move forward, but also keep it interesting and grow and learn and hopefully make a positive impact on the people and the organizations around me.
Mm-hmm.
And probably the most fun of my career, because at some point you reach a point, and I'm going to kind of counter what I said before. You're not the do. You don't get to do the direct day-to-day operating or whatever specific actions are happening in the business quite in that way. But it's been helping other people to find that courage to do and to go into highly ambiguous, uncertain situations and be willing to just figure it out. And like I said, it's been very rewarding and a lot of fun.
Awesome. So one of the things that we talked about very briefly, and I thought it was such an astute revelation that you shared with me, is as Black professional women, sometimes this journey can be lonely. Now, that doesn't say it doesn't get lonely for everyone, but in our conversation, that's what came out the most. Unpack that, right? For as much as you were fulfilled on your journey, looking back and with us talking, there were moments where you did feel lonely on it. And how did you navigate that loneliness when it set in?
Yeah. Yeah. I think a couple of things. One, reaching out, right? And finding peers and allies around the organization, or even probably even more importantly, outside of the organization that I can talk to.
Mm-hmm.
I went to lunch with a girlfriend a couple of weeks ago, and we called it the Hey Network. You know, somebody that you can just say, hey, how does this work? Hey, I'm uncertain about this. Hey, what should I do? Hey, what did you do? Everybody needs a hey network that you can reach out to in the organization and outside, just to sort of break down that loneliness. I think the second piece for me has been about being willing to be vulnerable and admit when I don't know something and be okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's been really hard. I have struggled just since growing up of just that need to be perfect, whatever
Mm-hmm.
that thing is, perfect in
Mm-hmm.
air quotes, because it doesn't really exist.
Mm-hmm.
But being willing to just ask questions, knowing that it might have people say, oh, how does she not know that?
Mm-hmm.
She should know, you know, and just having that feeling, but it's like, I've got to ask the question because I'm not sure. And I think the third piece for me is having I have been so blessed with a great family and friends beyond work.
Mm-hmm.
And work does not define me, even though I spend an inordinate amount of time working or traveling related to work, but it doesn't define me. I've got such a great network of family and girlfriends and just a village around me and my family. And that has been the saving grace in all of this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's so good. That's so good. And speaking of that, right, you know, one of the things that I know is that the mantle of greatness is heavy, you know, and so what else do you intentionally do to take care of you?
Hmm. Now, my husband might say, you don't do enough. So thankfully, he's not on here today, so he doesn't get to answer. But for me specifically, it has been about my mornings are important. And so it's not always a ton of time. I love to work out in the morning if I can. But if nothing else, I will always pray and meditate. You know, I'm like, I can do that in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever I've got, but I can make time just to do that sort of grounding and recentering. Before I get out of the bed, I have prayed and meditated. Before I go to sleep, I have prayed and meditated. So it's that centering, because then there's always storms swirling around, issues popping up, both ones that you were there, ones you had no idea that were there. And my goal is to try to be in the storm without the storm being in me. So throughout my day, there's always things going on, but I will always recenter myself, even throughout the day, with prayer and just a quick breath work helps me kind of come back into center, even in tough situations. Um, and I guess the last thing is finding those outlets and reconnecting with friends and family. You know, that is my self care, is my friends and my family network. Both of those things, prayer and meditation, friends and family, finding a little time to work out. Those things have kept me grounded, kept me whole.
So it's time for your empowering moment. This is a pause for the cause of jumpstarting your success. You see, during this time, I am being very intentional about inspiring and encouraging you. I want to help you go after what it is that you want to achieve. So during this segment, I am featuring passages from my book, Embrace Your Power and Go. This book is a 30-day journey that helps you really get out of your own way and jumpstart your success. There are intentions set for every single day that you can really anchor your thoughts and perspective around. There's a corresponding scripture reference that you can take as a promise. There's a passage that I personally penned for you to be encouraged. There's an affirmation that seals the day and a place where you can capture whatever is coming up for you and set goals. We are on day number 7 of unpacking this journey. And here is what I had for you. The intention for the day is this: evolve or repeat. you choose. And as you can imagine, it's around you making a decision and choice to move forward or stay the same. Our scripture reference is, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creature. The old has passed away, and behold, the new has come. That's 2 Corinthians 2:15. Now, on that day, I wrote something that really will encourage you to make the choice to move forward. And I seal the day with this affirmation that I will give to you now. Today, I choose to evolve and embrace change in my life in order to become the person God designed me to be. I release former attitudes, limiting mindsets, and mistakes of the past to walk in my greatness and soar to new heights in the purpose for which God has prepared me. That's what I want for you. I want you to soar to new heights. I want you to really lean into the possibility of who you can become. Now, if that resonates with you, I want to invite you to put your prime to work. This book is available for you on Amazon. But if you're ready to take action, I want to invite you to have a conversation with me about your best next step. I want you to really lean into becoming who it is that you want to be. Envision the best version of yourself and then become her. And so if that resonates, let's talk about it. Book a time for us to chat. You can access my calendar at www.callwithdenise.live. You choose the time and I will give you a call and we'll make some amazing things happen in your life. Now let's get back to it. Okay, now that we're back, I just want to tap a little bit more into your wisdom. So this whole segment is around you sharing just your wisdom on these particular topics and how you can help women who are at different states in their career. So my first question for you is, what's your best advice for a woman that is feeling stretched? Either she's being stretched by transition or opportunity, or maybe pressure that she's putting on herself to perform. What would you say to her?
Yeah. Well, first, I think it's recognizing that you are not alone. So if you're feeling stretched, somebody else is probably feeling stretched. And, I think it's sometimes we suffer in silence because we don't want, especially as well, I don't want to claim that just for women, because I think that men do this too, but, just not wanting people to think you can't handle it. You're not tough enough. You're not smart enough. All of these enoughs, whatever that may be. And so I would just say, don't suffer in silence, because there are plenty of other people that are having that same problem. So reach out to your manager or whatever group is bringing that stretching and in turn that stress, and just raise your hand and say, hey, I am stretched. Mm-hmm. And work on reprioritizing. I talk about that a lot at work, because some of the most important decisions that we'll make strategically is what we say no to make room for the most critical yeses. Mm. And I would just say, raise your hand and recognize that you are not alone, and prioritize, and don't be afraid to say that and be ruthless about it.
I love that. What's your best advice for a woman who's struggling to fit in at work? They find it hard to be accepted or understood.
I'll tell you what my flip response was going to be, and it was going to be, don't fit in, be yourself. Mm-hmm. And make people accept you as yourself. Not because you're making them by force, but just because you're showing up so authentically and so naturally as you. And I think that's important. And I think the second thing I would say is, you're not alone. There are other people who are also struggling with feeling like they don't fit in. And I would say oftentimes people don't reach out and connect. And even though you might be different because you come from a different company, maybe you dress different, you have a different culture, different educational background, whatever those things are that make us different, it also makes us the same because everybody's got something different about them, and just reach out. Whenever I'm in the office, I say hello to people. And I remember I was in one office and it was like, nobody ever says hello. We love it when you come and it's like, well, just say hello. Just that simple act of saying hello and giving a smile goes such a long way. But don't fit in, be yourself and reach out and connect. And you'll probably find others who are actually different than you, but also want to have a connection.
Mm-hmm. That's so true. And then finally, what's your best advice for a woman wanting to advance her career and get to the next level?
I think 3 things. One would be lean in. I hope it doesn't feel, I can't think of the word, but just a trite statement, because I know that was a very famous book, Sheryl Sandberg, but lean in, right? And part of how, for me, and I'm sure you, Denise, in your career and others, part of how you move forward is you've seen an opportunity because you were curious about something. You were willing to ask that question, willing to raise your hand and say, I'll help figure it out. And that's how you move your career. Lean in, raise your hand, be curious. And I think the second thing I think that is important is look at what that job is that you want to do next, right? And be very honest about where are you today in your skills and your experiences relative to what it takes for that next role. And do an honest gap assessment, and think about what things you need to improve upon in order to be ready. And I would encourage you to invite other people into that conversation, both in saying, hey, what are the skills needed for that next role? How do I rate relative to that? And what are some of the things that I should be doing in order to get ready, right? Because the job that you're doing now is the thing that's going to prepare you for next, right? And those would be my two pieces of advice. Lean in and do your gap assessment and invite others into that conversation.
That's so good. Such good wisdom. So this next little part, I identified 12 things that I say every power leader should know. And for me, a power leader is a woman leader who is really looking to transform her career in some sort of way. And so there's 12 of them, and I'm not going to ask you all 12. I'm going to have you pick 3 numbers, and depending on what 3 numbers you pick will be the one that you get to give us advice and feedback on.
Oh my goodness, I'm going to play the lottery with these 3 numbers. I'll send you half of the proceeds that we win.
Okay.
Okay. So between 1 and 12, just pick 3 numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what about 3, 6, and 9?
All right, 3, 6, and 9. So what's your best advice on how to make allies in high places?
Ooh, reach out. Reach out. And kind of like we talked about, it's a lonely role, when you are in a high place, because sometimes when you go to dinner, people don't want to sit next to you because they think that you're going to ask questions and talk about work the whole time, or they don't want to sit next to you on the airplane or what have you. And it's like, reach out, because those folks are human just like you, and they're thinking about what to make for dinner, or a kid that may be misbehaving, or but reach out, because they're human and people just like you. And even though you may not be in the same role, there's inevitably something that you can connect on.
That's really
and I think
good.
the second thing I would say is perform. People recognize good performance, and they recognize people that are willing to raise their hands and take on new things. And so if you're doing those things, reach out, just on a human level, and perform. I think that people will recognize that.
All right, number 6 is how to take feedback without taking offense.
Oh, that's a good one. Feedback without offense. 2 things. I think one is recognizing that feedback is a gift. And it really is, because it gives you a chance, if nothing else, to see how another person might be viewing you or viewing a situation. And that's information that you can leverage. Even if you don't necessarily agree with it, their perception is their reality, right? And it's a chance. And hopefully even so, it's going to help you be stronger, be a better leader, better at whatever it is that you're striving to do. And then the second thing, because sometimes you get feedback that's not always developmental, these are your strengths or weaknesses, but sometimes people might take a shot across the bow, and people will often say, well, how do you stay calm in the face of that? And I try to hear it the way I want it to be intended. You may have done that as an insult, as a slight, as a put down, as a dig, but how do I want that to be intended? How can I leverage that to make me better? And that has been the two things: is one, seeing it as a gift, and two, hearing it the way I want it to be intended.
That's good. Number 9 is how to leverage their Black girl magic, edge, and swagger.
Oh, because I have all of that. Because I have all of that edge and swagger. I love that. I say just is to own it. Don't mute it. Be you, be all of you, because the world, whatever organization, whatever team, whatever area, community you're part of, needs all of that makes you unique and makes you your best. And I would just say, bring all of it. Don't hide it. Don't change it. Don't adjust it because you think people want you to be a certain way. Because even if they do, they don't realize they're wrong. They need you to be all of you and all of your uniqueness. Yeah, own it.
Awesome. 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 So I've been asking these last 3 questions since the beginning of the podcast over 2 years ago. So you get to chime in with your life, love, and happiness wisdom. So it goes like this. What's your life wisdom? What would you tell your younger self about life if you could?
Ooh, I would tell her that it's going to be okay and you will survive this. And I say survive, and probably the better way, you will thrive through it. Maybe that's a better way to phrase it, because sometimes you have those moments and things may be going wrong. And it's like, how am I going to make it through this? It just feels so like you're just surrounded in this bubble of stuff. But inevitably you make it through, right? And it doesn't seem like it, but you will. And so I would say not only will you survive it, but you will thrive through it. And in fact, it's those things that are hard that are actually preparing you for more. You've got to go through the hard things, right? You've got to go through the hard things.
Yeah. Love wisdom. What would you tell your younger self about love if you could?
I'd say give it freely. The Bible says love your neighbors as yourself, right? And that's what we're all called to do, is to love, right? At the end of the day, oftentimes, not to go in deep into the Bible, but, we'll often make that a very complex book with all these rules and thou shalt and thou shall and all that stuff. But really, it's about love, right? And that's what we're here on this earth to do, is to love people. And I think the other thing that I think is neat about love your neighbor as yourself, it means inevitably you have to love yourself, right? You have to love yourself. So love yourself as you are fully, and love others as they are fully.
Beautiful. And then finally, happiness wisdom. What would you tell your younger self about happiness if you could?
I would tell myself 2 things. Happiness always is, even in the bad times. And I think that happiness, the source of happiness or joy, comes from gratitude, and I think that in any moment, whether it's good, bad, or in the middle or something else, there's always something to be grateful for. Whether it's just, it was a chance to connect with another human, maybe you got some great lesson that you learned, but somehow, even through the bad things, you're better. And I think that the key to happiness is recognizing that it is right now at all times. There's something to be happy about, which for me translates to being grateful for. Someone said, I think it was I don't know where it was, but they said the sun is always there. Even when there's clouds, the sun's behind it. And it's just recognizing that even when there's clouds, the sun is behind them. It's just covered up right now,
Oh, good. So, so good. So, Terrilynn, I want to just leave you with two things. I have always had a name crush. Million just sounds like such the perfect name to have. And I always thought that that was such a great name for you. And I also just want to leave you with the fact that I think success looks so good on you. And thank you for your example, your leadership, your wisdom, and for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me. This has been so much fun. You've asked questions that have made me think both on my feet, but I'll go away playing them through my mind and thinking. And you've given me some homework just in terms of how to be a better ally. Your question has made me even more accountable, and that I need to make time. Not that I don't, but I need to make more time to make sure I'm showing up for and reaching out to people for whom I can be an ally. So thank you for this time, and thank you for having such a great podcast.
Thank you.
It is just a wonderful platform for people to learn.
Absolutely. You know, when I listen back to my conversation with Terrilynn, I have to tell you how impressed I am with her. What she's been able to accomplish in her career makes me so incredibly proud. Looking back to us being young adults in college and now seeing the seat that she sits in as a global leader, it makes me feel so accomplished right with her. Knowing that she was able to take those humble beginnings and become such a powerhouse leader, it makes me know what's possible for all of us. I saw three things ring out so powerfully from every nugget that she shared. And I think these three things are what we can carry into our own success journey. What stuck out for me was her confidence, her commitment, and her consistency. And those are the things that we also can apply each and every day as we are in pursuit of our own goals and aspirations for our career. This is one of the reasons why it was important to me to double down on your career success in season 2 of the podcast. What is ahead of you is a great opportunity, and you can seize it and show up for it if you will exemplify your own confidence, your own commitment, and your own consistency. Having a confidence is merely showing up and knowing the value that you bring to the table. It's not about comparison. It's about being resolved in your own abilities. Being committed means that you're willing to continue to bet on yourself each and every day, knowing that you can show up and do good work and that you can show up and persevere. And then finally, being consistent means that you won't give up, that you will be resilient to see the accomplished version that you envision for yourself. Now, one thing I do know is that oftentimes we can get discouraged on our journey, and this is when you need a circle of support to help you. I say it all the time that partnership accelerates progress, but strategic relationships will always accelerate your success. And one of the things that I am offering in this season is the opportunity to forge a strategic relationship with me. My goal is to help you develop the skills, the savvy, and the momentum to get the career success that you want. You see, when you bring experience, insight, and wisdom to the table to help you, it collapses time. It allows you to get there faster. And so if you are interested in learning more about how I can help you achieve your goals and get promoted, you see that career success is something that is completely attainable for you. I invite you to have a call with me. The discovery call is exactly that. It's an opportunity for me to discover more about where you are and what it is that you want to achieve. And if I believe I can help you, then I'll make a recommendation that will include my services. But I am committed nonetheless to giving you some support and advice on what your best next step is. And so it's a win-win. I get to learn more about you and what you're looking to achieve. and you get insight on your next best step. Booking a call with me is so very easy. I give you complete access to my calendar to set up a time that works best for you. So this is the way to access my calendar. You go to www.callwithdenise.live. My calendar will open up. You can select a time, and then I will give you a call at the time that you set up for us. On the call, I'm going to ask you a series of questions. It's just so that I can learn more, so that I can make the best recommendation for you. So I invite you to do that today. I have some time on my calendar this week. It's a time set aside where I prioritize you and hear what it is that you want to accomplish. Now, we've got some more great conversations lined up. So if you haven't yet subscribed to the podcast, I welcome you to do that so that we can meet here again next week, and I'll show up in your lineup so that you don't miss. Now, if you love this episode, you're going to want to access the free resource I curated just for you. The Power Leader Toolkit is absolutely free, and it includes 3 power-packed career transforming resources that will help you change the game and build the career that you want and deserve. It includes my powerful training, The 7 Habits of Highly Successful Women. Now, you can get your hands on this toolkit right now. And as I said, it's absolutely free. You can access it at www.powerleadertoolkit.live. Again, that's www.powerleadertoolkit.live. And of course, I'll be back next week with more power leader strategies to help you transform your career. But until then, remember to always embrace your power and go.